we can explore whether meditation is something that we can engage in while listening, while having conversations, while going about our daily life. Because normally meditation is always taken to be something that one does sitting silently. It gives the time and the space to take a step back, to retreat into ourself, and thereby be able to disconnect from the stream of thoughts and identification with thoughts and so on. But it would be of not great value if we immediately step out of it into again the same way of engaging with thoughts and identifying with thoughts and so on. So, the ability to stay meditatively is more important than sitting in meditation. Because if you are able to live meditatively, then meditation is not an activity that only happens for a few minutes a day or when we are in a particular place or time. First of all, when we listen to anyone or anything, the way we by default listen is we have a certain filter from which we listen, and that filter is what we call as me. So, whenever we listen to anything, and it can happen even right now or when we speak, it is important to look into how we are listening. Are we listening from the set of preferences we have, the set of likes and dislikes we have, the opinions we have, and whether it conforms to our opinions or whether it contradicts our opinions? All of these secondary processes come in the way of listening, and those are exactly what we take to be I. So when I, the quote unquote I, listen to something, the standpoint from which I listen or the center from which I listen happens to be the past memories. So there is the accumulation of all the various opinions, likes, dislikes, right and wrong. All of this gets collected and they all get triggered when we listen. And then we are constantly, while we are listening to the words, we are reacting internally. And then based on that, we are reacting externally. And this is why it is easy to get lost in those reactions as me. So we take that reaction to be me, to be I. So to do self inquiry, therefore, is to be aware of how the me functions while we go about day to day living. Then the inquiry, who am I, is not isolated to just sitting with eyes closed and meditating, but to be very aware of the movement of I and thereby be free of it. Because if we are not aware of something, we cannot be free of it. Let's say one is attached to anything, one's country or one's religion or one's language or one's family or one's career, and if we listen out of this and there is a conversation, if we really look at it carefully, or it can even be one's guru, all of these are attachments. So when we look at it and then if we speak and if we listen to a conversation, then we tend to get divided. So we are inwardly fragmented because we are listening to that content of what is being discussed from the standpoint of a particular identity. And that identity is what is listening. And that identity is nothing but memory that has been accumulated over time, that we have taken ourselves to be I. So, because we unconsciously identify with that memory, we take that to be I. So, we say, I am Indian, or I am Hindu, or I am Christian, or I am any of these identifications, and same whatever roles we take at work or at family or wherever. So, all of these have their place in a transactional way, what's called Vyavaharika. So, you need a passport to travel, and that's how the world functions. So, there we have to say that I have an American passport or an Indian passport, or when we are engaging in any particular role, the role has its place, but it cannot be inwardly corrupting us. Outwardly, we can have this role as necessary for the given circumstances, but inwardly, if we are listening or if we are talking, and it can be even practically at work, for instance, or in family with children, when we see this all the time. We can be a father, for example, but if we try to listen to a child, especially a grown child, as a father, and with that attitude of control or authority, we don't connect with the children. They tend to resist us. So same is true at work, same is true in any situation, and in political discussions. So in any aspect of life, as we go through the day, what we tend to do is we take on the role psychologically inwardly as me, and then because of this inward psychological role we have assumed, we are unconsciously reacting to the content. So the reactions that rise because of identification with the role becomes the me. So this is the way in which we go about living, and it's very important to inquire into this and look into this. So even when we listen to any content, whether it is spiritual or whether it's worldly, whatever it may be, if we are listening out of this kind of a filter, that this is me, I like this, I don't like this, I agree with this, I disagree with this, and all these opinions that are so calcified within us, and out of that we do what is called as, this is why the word shravanam is used in Sanskrit. It's a very extremely important place given to listening, because listening cannot happen if we are listening from the ego. So that is what we do when we listen out of all these reactions. So any egoic reaction that I take myself to be me is an impediment to listening, and therefore listening cannot happen. So this is why ultimately, when we also listen to the highest teaching, the true realized being comes and says, you are not what you take yourself to be, your pure awareness. We resist that because we are listening out of the standpoint of the ego. And therefore we say, what does it mean? I am this, I am that. And how? So it just simply becomes a concept. And either we then take one more concept to add to our baggage, and then it has no value except as a dead concept, or we simply resist it and don't even take it in. And either way, it's not helping us much. Either we simply parrot a concept we learned, or we don't even actually take it in. But what if we listen instead from the perspective of where we are truly listening from? So, and the way to do this is to listen to our own reactions. So, when I'm listening to anything, there are reactions rising, and our default is to, as we said, identify with the reaction as me. But then, if we really are very careful, we see that we are able to observe our own reactions. Whatever reactions rise, whatever resistance. So, if I may like something, if someone says something very pleasing and then I like it, and then I am so carried away by the liking, and that is also the same ego. So if I am aware that I am getting pleasure out of this listening because he is saying something very agreeable to me, he may have political views similar to mine, and therefore I am very much enjoying listening to him. And on the flip side, I may be resisting someone who's speaking something else. So these reactions are how the I functions. So the question is, am I those reactions? Which is another way of asking, who am I? So when we see, then these reactions are also something we can listen to. So then, who is listening to the reactions? So that space from which we can not only listen to the other person, but listen to our own reactions, that is awareness. And when we are able to not be identified, so that is why it is unconscious when we identify. It is not that we lose consciousness in the traditional sense, but we are unconsciously identified with the reaction that rises. This is why we see how people get angry when something goes wrong, or people get very excited when something goes right, because there is an unconscious identification with the reaction as me, and therefore the me is either excited or depressed, happy or sad, and all the rest. But when we are very conscious, then the very reaction can be seen as simply another thought, another wave in awareness. So when I see that all these reactions that are rising are also simply movements within awareness, they are simply content of awareness, and they are not me, therefore, they are just like another wave in the ocean, another wave in the ocean of consciousness. So when we recognize, therefore, that we can be fully attentive, fully alert, and fully aware, then in that alert awareness, we are able to listen or watch or be aware of not only the content of the conversation, or it can be not just conversation, it can be watching something, it can be smelling something. So for example, how people unconsciously eat, it's all the same phenomenon. You smell something very nice, and then unconsciously we get identified with the reaction that says, I like this food, and then we start eating. And this is why they call it as binge eating, and people lose. So it's unhealthy in every levels. But if I'm aware of the reaction that says, I am carried away by the smell of this food, and I'm able to just simply be aware and not be carried away by that reaction, then the natural intelligence kicks in as to what is right to eat. So it's not just we take listening as an example, but all the six senses. So the five senses, as we know, which are listening, seeing, smelling, tasting, and touching. And the sixth sense is the mind itself. That's why Krishna says in the Gita, Manashasthani Indriyani. He says there are six senses, sixth being the mind. So, just as the five senses bring various objects, mind also brings various thoughts from the memory. And that's where we again get triggered. So, a past memory comes of someone did something wrong, or someone did something right, or something I enjoyed as a past experience. And then we again react to that. That's how people inwardly, just as outwardly, we get lost in the five senses. Inwardly, too, we get lost in our own mind activity. We react to our own mind, and we just get lost in either anger or depression or so many negative activities of the mind simply by identifying with the reaction to the very activity of the mind. So, all the six, the five primary senses and the mind all have the same quality of bringing in content. That's what they do. They are called jnanendriyas. They bring in content, but when we take in the content unconsciously, then we react out of the me, and thereby we get lost and identified and get triggered or get excited or all the rest as we saw. But if you are able to listen or watch or observe or be aware of whatever the senses bring up as well as our own inner reactions, then there is the space of awareness. We are not constricted by the reaction, but we have suddenly a vast space opening up. And in the space of awareness, we can see all these reactions and how they are coming up based on simply dead memories, and how they are not me in the sense that I am here watching these reactions. Therefore, the reactions are simply memory. They are just dead past knowledge, memory, whereas I am here as the living awareness. And when we recognize this aspect of our being as the living awareness that can see all this very consciously, then that's meditation. That's living meditatively, and thereby we are not lost in these. Because people ask about whether this is practical, there is a tendency to think of self in somehow otherworldly or disconnected from the world. But then that's again a division we create in our own mind, and that division is always unhealthy because it's like we then have a split personality. But if we are whole and not fragmented, then we can have the same conscious way of living everywhere, and thereby we can, without talking about any philosophical matters, we can still bring the light of awareness into any conversation. And that is the greatest service we can offer anyone too. When we listen to someone, when we are in any conversation, if we are very light, if we are aware, and if we are fully present, and we are not getting caught up in all the reactions that mind brings up, but if we are able to be attentive and completely free, then there is a totally different flavor to our listening, and that is available to us here and now. So that's why Ramana Maharishi always said, what you are looking for is available here and now. You keep on going out, but it's available here and now, and it's such a powerful pointer. But we still, the mind says, no, 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 it is so hard, I cannot do this, so I need to do something else. So the postponement is another activity of the mind. So even if we glimpse into this for one moment, that glimpse is a direct glimpse into our own truth of being. And the more we glimpse into it, the more it has its own power, and it has its own, because that when we taste the timeless even for a moment, then all activities of time seem very silly. So of course activities in time are necessary to take care of day-to-day work, whether it's cooking or eating or going to work or whatever, but we don't get so caught up in it because the timeless is our home. And when we find our home even for a moment, then that power and the pull of the home is always there, and more we get settled in our home, and we can still, there are faculties, there is intelligence that is always available to engage with worldly activities, with whatever technology or whatever things we need to do, but we don't get identified with it. We are always home, and the more we are home, the more we are free, and it has its own magnetic pull, we can say that. So the main essence of therefore meditation is to be able to abide in that space as much as we can consciously through the day. Even if we slip out of it, if we can bring us back, and which requires us to watch our reactions through the day, whatever happens. And if we are able to watch our reactions through the day, anytime we catch ourselves getting caught and lost in our reactions is a moment of freedom, because the very awareness that is able to identify that I'm lost in my reaction is already our true nature. So to be able to be aware or be conscious of our reactions, and thereby the very consciousness gives freedom. We don't have to be free. Just by simply being aware of the reaction and without even verbalizing it, we can say that's not me. So just the fact that we see the reaction means, am I those reactions? I'm not, because I'm watching them, I'm aware of them. And thereby I can be I can be instantly in that moment free of those reactions. And the more I bring that quality of awareness through my daily activities, the more I can taste this ground of freedom, which is our true nature.